We're actually not going to cover chapters 4 and 5 in class today. We're going to skip those and talk about chapters 6 and 7, but I am going to at least give a thumbnail sketch of chapters 4 and 5 because the information there is going to be really important to really grasping the content of chapters 6 and 7. Jen and I are going to be gone in a couple weeks, and so I've asked Ralph if he would to teach those two chapters while we're away. But I want to at least give a thumbnail sketch of those. Actually, what I'm going to do is kind of give a thumbnail sketch of chapters 1 through 5 before we look at the content of chapters 6 and 7. So I want to look a little bit at where we've been, and then we're going to dig into the messages of chapters, really the message of chapters 6 and 7. So let me give you kind of a brief summary of where we've been at the scene that's painted for us in chapters 4 and 5, and then we'll talk some about, as I said, chapters 6 and 7. So here's my summary of chapter 1. Jesus, who rides in the chariot of God, is the commander-in-chief. He is the one that's in charge of God's armies and holds the special forces of the universe in His right hand. Stands with His people who shine His light in a dark world. That's the picture that's painted for us in Revelation chapter 1. John, who is one of His disciples, is alone on the island of Patmos. And he and his loneliness and he and his suffering is representative of what's going on among Christians in that time, particularly in Asia Minor, who find themselves at odds with the world and at odds with the empire. And so the message of Jesus, as He comes to visit John, is that the one who rides in God's chariot, the only one who's qualified to do so, and who is the commander-in-chief of all of God's armies, and who holds the special forces of God, the angels of God. You can think of whatever kind of elite army unit you might want to think of. He holds the angels of heaven in His right hand, and He stands with His people who are shining His light in a dark world. Chapters 2 and 3 then, here are my summary of that. Jesus then, as the commander-in-chief, sends messages of encouragement and exhortation to His people who are on the front lines. And His messages are not only to His people, His messages are also to those special forces, to those angels who are ministers on behalf of His people. And the messages to these churches are also marching orders for these special forces who are going to execute His purpose among His people. Jesus' message to them as He writes to them is, I know your victories, I know your losses, I know your environment where you live, I know your growth, I know your reputation, I know your opportunities, and as He says to Laodicea, I even know your temperature, what the level of your zeal is. And the messages that He sends to them are the messages that address their most pressing needs in the moment. The things He says to them are the things that they need to hear. In some cases, they need encouragement to hold fast, and in some cases, they need exhortation, even rebuke to repent, because they are giving in to their culture rather than fighting against it. And so Jesus sends these messages as the commander-in-chief to these churches. Now in chapter 4, something exciting happens because John is invited to leave the island of Patmos, and he sees up in heaven a doorway. And he is invited to enter through the doorway into the throne room of God. If I were going to speak of what he sees there, it would be in our nation and in our culture, the equivalent of the president's situation room. I mean, this is where the battle is mapped out. This is where the most elite counselors, the most important members of his cabinet, this is where they're all assembled in order to address pressing needs in time of conflict. And so John, and we get to see John, because he carries a camera into the room, we get to see what he sees when he enters into Jehovah's situation room. This is the Oval Office of the cosmos. And what John gets to see when he comes into this room in Revelation 4 is he gets to see where God sits and where God governs. And as he looks around the room, he sees 4 living creatures there who are the most powerful beings in the cosmos. And not only the most powerful, they are the most insightful, communicated by the fact that they have all these eyes all around them. And in addition to the 4 living creatures, there are 24 elders who are seated on thrones around God's throne. And these 24 elders are the wisest leaders and the noblest counselors, past or present. And the entire room, the throne of God, the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders, everything is illuminated by the Spirit that burns brightly in the 7 lamps that are set up there. There are thunder peals and there are lightning flashes, and in front of the throne is this great sea that is completely placid and calm. It's as smooth as glass. I want you to see that what is represented here are all of the emblems of absolute power. The most powerful and majestic beings, the most powerful and wise men, and the most powerful elements, thunder, lightning, the sea, are all present. And all of them in appropriate ways, in ways that are appropriate to their nature, are communicating and they are celebrating the fact that God reigns. How does the sea communicate that God is in control? It communicates it by being completely smooth, by being completely placid, by not having one wave on it, because God is the one that governs. And how does the lightning and the thunder show that? Well, the thunder shows it by pealing, by rumbling, and the lightning by flashing. And how do the 4 living creatures show that? They show that by the fact that they give God their worship. They are so powerful, but they exalt Him. And how is it that 24 elders show it? They show it by leaving their thrones and by falling on the floor in front of God, by removing the crowns from their head and casting them down in front of His throne, and by giving Him their worship. So everything here, in a way that's appropriate to its nature, communicates and celebrates the fact that God reigns. The sights, the symbols, the sounds, the scenes, all of them communicate the absolute power of God. All of them show in their assembly there that the sovereignty of the Almighty, that He reigns. What happens next? Well, there is this tumult of worship by all of these beings that are assembled there, and then there's a pause. And an angel in chapter 5 comes into the room who is a strong angel, and he has the role in the court of being a crier. Just like when the president visits an assembly of the houses and speaks, there's a crier that goes before him and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." Well, here is a strong angel who comes in, and he is the crier here, and he's about to make an introduction, but he makes the introduction with a question. And so the elders quiet, and the creatures quiet, and the thunder and the lightning quiets, and the sea is still calm, and the strong angel comes in, and there is in the hand of Jehovah that sits on the throne a scroll. And this scroll has a message that's pregnant with meaning and that begs to be revealed. The scroll is God's master plan. It is His strategy for what He's going to do in the present crisis. And the fact that it's a full message is communicated by the fact that the paper is written on the front side and the back side. But it's all bound up, and there are 7 wax seals. You've seen the kind of thing where you melt a little bit of wax and you put it on the back of an envelope, and then you take a seal and you stamp it in. And so that's the way that this scroll is sealed. It has these 7 wax seals on it, and it has this. It has the emblem of the Almighty that has marked it. And so this is His plan, and it's in His right hand. And so this is what the angel says to the group that's assembled there. He says, "Who's worthy to come and to take the scroll and to open it and reveal its content?" And in fact, the opening of the scroll won't just be done. Hear the question, it's who's worthy? The opening of the scroll can't just be done by someone who's going to open it up and show us what's inside. The one who can open the scroll has to be worthy to be the executor of this will of God. He has to be someone who is not only worthy to open it, who has the credentials to do that, but who also has the credentials to carry it out. He has to be qualified to fulfill the plan, the master plan that God has in mind. And so everyone in the room looks at each other, and nobody can do it. Not the 4 living creatures, not the 24 elders. There isn't anyone there who's qualified to do it. And if we were to search heaven and earth, we can't find anyone who can open the scroll. And so John starts to cry. Because he wants to know what God's plan is, and it looks as if seeing God's plan has been thwarted. And then one of the 24 elders, who's wearing his white robe and is wearing his gold crown, speaks words gently to John and says for him not to cry because there's someone that can open the scroll. And then all of a sudden there's another being that's in the room. And he is, aside from the one that's on the throne himself, he's the most impressive one there. He has the heart of a lion. And he has the lineage of David. But he bears the mark of a lamb who suffered the wrath of God for sinners. His crown of thorns is now a crown of horns because he rules. And the spirit that burns in the 7 lamps fills him with perfect wisdom and vision. He has 7 eyes indicating his wisdom and his insight. And this lion-hearted lamb who's been slain comes without any hesitation, without any objection from anyone in the situation room. And he walks up to the throne of the great I Am, the Ancient of Days, and he takes from him the scroll that's in his hand. And when he does, the tumult, this worship that had been given by all of these great beings, that had paused for just a moment while the crier spoke and while the search was made, and when the worthy one made his entrance into the room, the tumult now erupts again with fresh exuberance. Everyone in the room falls on the floor before Jehovah and the Lamb, and we're told that they're all clutching in their hands harps and golden bowls that are filled with incense. Because what has just happened here is an event, is a spectacle that is the answer to every prayer and is the object of every praise. All of it is seeing its fulfillment here in what it is that's happened. And as they rise from the floor, there is this hymn, this song that is improvised in the moment. It's a new song. It's not an old song. It's a brand new song that is improvised just for the occasion. And this song is more than a song, it's an anthem. That's what we do, isn't it? In places that are our capitals and when you have heads of state that are present. And what is being sung here is an anthem. And it's an anthem of praise. It is the anthem of the Lamb. It's the anthem of the Lamb. There are 3 different verses that are sung at the end of chapter 6. The first verse is only sung by the 4 living creatures and by the elders. And the verse starts like this: "Worthy art thou." And on the second verse, more in the room join in the song. And so the first verse is a pianissimo of praise, but when we get to the second verse, what we find is a fortissimo of praise. It is elevated and it is louder and the volume has increased. And so on the second verse that begins, "Worthy is the Lamb," then suddenly the heavens are filled, the situation room here is filled with the army of God, all the mighty angels that are beneath His command, 10,000 times 10,000s, and they're all joining in the song. And then when we get to the third verse, every created being in heaven or on earth or under the earth now join in heaven's praise. And what was a pianissimo of praise and then a fortissimo of praise is now a blastissimo of praise. I mean, it erupts. And there is this crescendo, this finale of praise where every being that has breath and every being that has any bone of godliness in it sings the anthem of the Lamb together. When people hurt and don't know why, when we can't see the future, when we can't make sense of what's wrong in the world, when we wonder who's winning and who's in charge, when good men like John weep because they can't see God's purpose and want to so badly, when all of those things happen, we need to see that God is on His throne. And we need to see the lion-hearted Lamb of Judah, who is crowned with horns, who has the right and the authority to not only reveal God's purpose, but to execute God's purpose. This scene that's painted in these 2 chapters is for people who need to know. And here is what they need to know. They need to know that God reigns and that the lion-hearted Lamb of Judah is worthy. Now that gets us ready for chapters 6 and 7. Because the Lamb is now going to open the scroll. He's going to break the wax seals and He's going to show us what's inside. And He's not only going to show us, He is going to make sure that it gets carried out. He is going to execute the purpose of God. Now, with all that's happened so far, we would expect that what is going to be revealed with the breaking of the seals is a remedy. We are in a time of crisis, and the master plan is about to be unfurled. Jehovah and His commander-in-chief are about to lay out the battle plan. They're about to show what God's strategy is. And so you'd expect that as He breaks the seals and He opens up and shows what's inside the plan, that what's going to come out is going to be a solution. And so we're surprised at what happens next as He begins to break the seal. As He breaks seals 1 through 4, and He's going to break 6 of the seals in chapter 6, but as He breaks seals 1 through 4, what happens is these 4 horsemen appear on the scene. And they go and they have their run of the earth. And each of the horsemen are riding a horse of a different color. The first horse is a white horse. And the second horse is a red horse. And the third horse is a black horse. And the fourth horse is an ashen-colored horse. And the color of the horse communicates something about his mission. And not only does the color of the horse communicate something about the mission of the rider, but so do the items that each of the riders have. And so the first rider that comes out on the white horse has a bow. And he is given a crown. And he's given permission to go and to conquer. And then the second horse, rider who is riding the red horse is given a great sword. And he's given permission to go and to take peace away from the earth and cause violence, bloodshed. The third horse, the black horse, comes, and the rider is carrying scales, the kind that would be used in the marketplace in that day. And there is an announcement made, the kind of announcement that might be made when you're selling wares in the marketplace, an announcement of what the prices are. And the prices are not only indicate inflation, maybe the result of some kind of black blight or some kind of famine. But they're not only inflated prices, they're unjustly inflated, so that prices have gone up for things that the poor people need. The price of bread has gone through the roof. But prices for commodities that only the wealthy can afford are still the same. They've stayed stable. And so while bread and wheat have gone up, the price of oil and wine is still the same. And so the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. And then in the fourth picture that's painted, this rider doesn't have something in his hand. He has a companion. And the rider has a name on this occasion. His name is Death. He rides the ashen horse, and right on his heels is Hades. And they go out and they're given permission to kill a fourth of the earth. And so I said to you that what we expected with the opening of the seals was some kind of remedy. But in fact, what we find is not a remedy for all that's wrong in the world. What we find instead is that evil, instead of being deterred, is unleashed. And it's unleashed in a way that allows it to run rampant. And these four horsemen represent four ills that are going to be allowed to run. One is the ill of conquest. And the rider that is pictured there on the white horse with the bow and with the crown is especially fitting for the Roman Empire. Augustus was, his favorite deity was Apollo. And Apollo is frequently represented, most often represented in art, as one who carries a bow and arrow. His twin sister was Artemis, and she was a huntress too. She also had a bow and arrow. And so Apollo was Augustus and the Caesars. He was their patron deity. And so it's appropriate that he should be, that this victor, this conqueror should be revealed to us in that kind of way. And so here's the ill of conquest. Following that is the ill of violence, of unrest. Whether you're talking about civil war or whether you're talking about war between nations, it's just the fact that men do evil things. And then on the heels of that is economic oppression and economic inequity that is communicated there. And in the fourth ill is the peril of death and the peril of Hades. Now, please don't understand from that what is being revealed here is something that's kind of a calendar of things that's going to happen. This is just a picture of the fact that evil has been unleashed. Not in a way that says that this one's going to come first and this one's going to come second, or any kind of cause and effect relationship between the four. It's just the complexity of evil unleashed in the world. But please get this, it's important. Jesus is letting it happen. In fact, He's making it happen by opening the seals. And so He's unleashing these ills on mankind. Now, what happens with the next two seals, seal number 5 and seal number 6, is a response to what has just happened with the opening of the first 4 seals. One response is from people in heaven, and one response is from people on the earth. But they're two different communities of people. The community of people that we're introduced to with the opening of seal number 5 is the community of believers. It's the community of people who put their trust in God, who have confidence. It's the people, like the people in the 7 churches, that are looking for God's answer in this time of crisis. The people that we're introduced to with the opening of the 6th seal are people who are also spectators to the things that are happening in the world, to seeing the world come unhinged, seeing the world come unglued, seeing the world being shaken, and they also have a response to it. And part of what we're to see in looking at the 5th seal and the 6th seal is a contrast in these two communities of people and how they respond to the presence of evil in the world. The first community of people, I said, are those in heaven. And you know why they're in heaven? Because they've died for their faith. And so they are the souls of those who have sacrificed, who've given their life. And they are in this situation room. We've not been introduced to this part of the room yet, but there is an altar that's there. And these souls are all assembled around the altar. They're underneath the altar. I thought at the first reading of this that the reason that they're assembled around the altar, I think it's part of the picture here, but the reason they're around the altar is because they've all given their life there. I mean, they've all sacrificed for God. And so their blood has been shed on the altar. But then it occurred to me that's not the point at all. The reason that they cling to the altar is not because that's where they gave their life. It's because that's where Jesus gave His life. And so what gives them confidence to make the appeal that they do to God, and what gives them the right to be there is not that they're clinging to their works and what they did and how they died. It's the fact that He died, that the Lamb was slain, and that this is the altar where He bled, and where that's given them the right to be in this room at all. And so here they are under the altar, and they have a complaint because they died and they suffered, and there's all this bad stuff that's going on in the world. And so the question they ask is, how long, God? How long are you going to let this go on? And when are you going to call a halt to it? When are you going to unplug the world, and when are you going to judge mankind? When's that going to happen? We are ready to be avenged. And instead of finding a response from God where He sends the commander-in-chief and where He brings His special forces and where they go in and they call an end to it all, instead what they're told to do is to be patient. And they're given a white robe and they're told to rest for a little while. And while they're resting, they're told that there's going to be more people like them that are going to join their ranks because more disciples are going to suffer and die. And so they're told to wait. That's the fifth seal. The sixth seal is opened, and it's another picture that is like the former picture of the four seals, with trouble happening, with conquest and with violence and oppression and death. But in this picture, it's a scene of the world completely falling apart. And so the sun is black as sackcloth, and the moon turns to blood. And I love the picture of the falling of the stars. It says that they're falling, and I've heard this kind of sound in the woods when you hear like fruit dropping from the tree, or where you hear nuts dropping from the tree and they're pinging things. And he says that that's the way the stars are falling out of the sky. It's just like unripe grapes, hard, or not grapes, but figs, unripe figs that are hard, and they're falling out of the tree in a big wind, and you hear them thumping the ground, thumping your head. And so he says the stars are falling just like that, and it's like someone took the sky and ripped it apart, like you took a piece of paper and tore it. And the mountains are moving, and the islands are running out of their places. And here is mankind, and they're watching the world come unglued, and you think that they'd run to God. But that's not what they do. They run from God. And they go into the caves, and they go into the mountains, and they get under the rocks, and they cry for the rocks and the caves and the mountains to fall on them, because they want to hide from God. They don't want to see His wrath. And they ask a question. They say, who can stand? Who can stand against the wrath of the Lamb? Now, I want you to see these two pictures together, because they are two responses to the presence of evil in the world, and to trying to figure out what this is all about. What is God doing in this? First, I want you to see that there are two different complaints that are offered about how God is handling things. The people of God have a complaint, and the people of the world have a complaint. The complaint of the people of God is this: they are complaining about God's patience. They say, how long? Now, if it were up to them, they would call a halt to it right now. Let God come and let Him knock some heads. Let God come and let Him execute judgment. We're ready for it. And so it's the cry of those who complain, the righteous complaining about God's patience. But the wicked have a very different complaint. Their complaint is about God's justice. They don't want judgment to come. They are hiding from judgment. God is unfair. And so it's two different complaints about the situation. There are two different responses to God. Two different responses to God. The righteous, they cling to the altar where Jesus was broken to save them from this broken world. But notice what the wicked are clinging to. The wicked cling to a broken world. The world is falling apart around them. The mountains are falling in. Everything is falling from the sky, and they are clinging to the world. They're going into the caves. They're wanting to get more into the world, not more out of it. And so they're clinging to a broken world to save them from the wrath of the Lamb who would be broken for them. That doesn't make any sense. And then there's two different questions that are asked. The question of how long, and the question at the end of chapter 6 and verse 17, who is able to stand? The implication being, who's able to stand the wrath of God? And so, the righteous have questions about how God is handling things. The wicked have questions about how God is handling things. And so, how does this strategy of unleashing evil on the world, why does God countenance it? How do you reconcile this? What's God doing in this? How is this the plan? Well, chapter 7 tells us how this is the plan. And the way that the questions of the righteous and the wicked are answered, and in fact the way that the four horsemen are answered, is with two different pictures that are painted in chapter 7. Because this is, in the first scene, this is what God is doing while all of these things are happening. And the way that that's introduced is a picture of, there are four angels here. Instead of four riders, there are four angels. And they all have the wind by the tail. And they're all standing at the four corners of the earth, these four angels. And you know they've got to be some kind of angels that they can hold on to the wind, but they are. And these angels are ready to fulfill the petition of the souls under the altar that want God to do something. Because you know what's going to happen if they let go of this wind? It is going to blow the world away. And they're ready to let it happen. But before they can let go of the wind and let it wreak the judgment of God on the world, for the wrath of God to be unleashed, before that can happen, another angel appears in the east. And this angel says, wait. Before you do this, I have a mission. And he has in his hand a seal. This is a different kind of seal, and yet similar in some ways from the seal that we talked about that is on the scroll. This is a seal that's going to be used to mark people instead of being used to mark the scroll. But it has a similar kind of purpose because the seal is going to be used to identify those that belong to God. And so the angel says, before you let go of the wind, we're going to take a census. And who we're going to count are all the people that are on the Lord's side. And so the angel is going to go through all the nations of the earth, and he's going to mark all the people that belong to God in a very conspicuous place. He's going to mark all of them on their forehead, so that there is no secret about who they are and about who they stand with, and so that there is no missing them. And the count, when the census is taken, the number here is not intended to be literal. It's intended to communicate a message about the nature of the census, because there is no one that's going to be missed. You see the point? The point is one of giving assurance during the unleashing of this evil. And so the assurance that's given is that there's not going to be anyone that's missed in this census. 144,000 are counted. And they are represented as 12 tribes. All of that alludes to the 12 tribes of Israel under the Old Covenant. And there are 12,000 from every tribe. And the message again is that, here you have a perfect counting and a perfect numbering, and it's all very symmetrical the way that it's done. 12,000 from all 12 tribes equals 144,000. And there's a message communicated even about which tribes are named and which ones aren't. Dan is missing from the list. Also, Ephraim is missing from the list. And in their places, Joseph is counted, and Levi. Remember, Levi was never counted in terms of owning land in the inheritance because their heritage or their inheritance was to serve in the temple. Well, now, all of these are going to be allowed to serve in the temple. They've all been elevated to Levi status. But the two nations that are left out are not the two nations, but the two tribes that are left out for good reason. Dan and Ephraim were the two tribes that were responsible for introducing idolatry into Israel. If you go back to the time of Judges, it was in Dan that they first started to introduce that corruption into the land. And when Jeroboam, when he and the nations to the north seceded from the union, when they broke away, remember Jeroboam introduced the worship of Baal into Israel, and he set up two altars, two places of worship, one sanctuary in Bethel and one in Dan. And he was the leader of the nation, or what became the nation of Ephraim, as it's often referred to in the prophets. So those two are missing, which says that, again, this is a perfect counting, because the people that are marked here are not people who are nominally followers of God. These are people who, down in their real being, down in their core, these are people who are really on the Lord's side, and God is not going to miss one of them. All of them are going to be counted. Nobody is going to be missed. And that's the assurance that's given here. Now, I want you to see how that answers the two questions. How that answers the question, how long, and how that answers the question, who can stand? How long is God going to countenance evil? He's going to countenance evil as long as it takes for Him to find all the people who belong to Him. That's how long. God is not passive while evil is going on in the world. In fact, what's happening? What's happening with evil is what was represented by those two camps of people and their responses to evil. God is sorting people out. And so He's finding the kind of people who, when they are faced with a world that they chose by their own sin, a world where there is conquest, in a world where there is violence, in a world where there is oppression, in a world where there is death, when they are faced with a world that they chose by their own sin, then they're the kind of people who say, I don't want this God, and they come and they cling to the altar. And then there's another camp of people who, when they receive the world that we chose by our sin, they want to hold on to it. They want to cling to this world, and they want to fly from God. And so what God is doing is He's sorting out people. He's seeing who are His kind of people and who are not. And He's going to wait as long as it takes. He's going to be as patient as is necessary for this all to work out. He understands pain. His commander-in-chief is the lion who's the lamb that was slain. He knows all about suffering. And He knows all about how to sort out people's real nature in the course of suffering. Well, that leads then to the second picture. It's a picture of the same people. Again, the idea of the 144,000 is just to communicate the fact that this is a perfect counting that nobody's missed. But in the second scene that's painted here, this 144,000 is not 144,000. It's a multitude of people that you can't even count. You can't enumerate all the people that are here. And these people are now not on earth. These people are in heaven. And what was, when the fifth seal was opened, a group of people who clung to the altar is now a crowd of people who are all around the altar. A multitude. And they're not just from the 12 tribes. They are from every nation. They are from every tongue. They are an innumerable host of people. And they're all wearing the same clothes that were given to those that suffered under the altar. They're all given white robes, and they're wearing them. And they have palm branches in their hands. It's what the Jews used when they celebrated their holy days, especially the Feast of Tabernacles, where they celebrated the fact that God tented among them. And it's appropriate that they should celebrate with palm branches here because these people are in the presence of God. And the picture that's painted here is a picture of how all of this is going to work out. This is how it's all going to work out. It's going to work out with a people who are victorious. These people that have been numbered are these people that are going to be victorious, and they're going to stand in the presence of God. And now the worship starts again. And we ended in chapter 5 with a third verse. Now they sing verse number 4. But now it's not just the living creatures, and it's not just the 24 elders, and it's not just the angelic host. Now mankind, redeemed mankind, has joined in the praise as well. And so they sing verse number 4 and verse number 10 of chapter 7, salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne, and they worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. And one of the elders says to John, you know who these people are? And John says, you know. And John doesn't want to confess the fact that he doesn't know. And so the elder says that these are those who've come out of the tribulation. These are those who have suffered. These are those that are hurt. These are my kind of people. These are, and this is John's message to the churches in Philadelphia and Smyrna and Ephesus. This is you, folks. This is where God is going to take you. This is what God has in mind for you. To the church at Chelsea, this is you, folks. This is us in the presence of God, and it's what God is doing in our hurt. It's what He's doing in our world. It's what He wants to do with us. And here is how that makes sense in light of the strategy of God. Why does He unleash evil on the world? Well, the path from A to B is this. That's the way that you people heaven. That's the way that heaven is going to be populated and filled. It's by God allowing things to happen in the world that sort people out, that test us, that find where do our real loyalties lie? Who are we with? Are we going to cling to God or are we going to cling to this world? Are we going to hold on to Him or are we going to hold on to rocks and mountains and caves and things that can't help us? Is our loyalty going to be a loyalty that holds on to our nation and holds on, trust in our armed forces, and trust in the rightness of everything that our country stands for? Or is our loyalty going to be a loyalty that cleaves to God, that believes in Him, believes and trusts in Him to the death, because we know that His purpose is going to stand? And so the reason for the unleashing of the 4 horsemen and the things that follow is to test us and to see who gets the mark, who gets the robe, who gets the crown. When it's all over with, who's going to cling to the altar and who's going to cling to the world. And so that's chapter 6 and 7. Okay, I'm done. Anybody have any questions? I haven't given you any time for that. We, as you see, we have to move fast. But we're a third of the way through the book right now as we get to the end of chapter 7. Anybody have any questions about what we've talked about? Anything that in your reading that was puzzling to you? Yeah, Flynn. I think it's just communicating the point that not a literal place of where they are, but of the fact that there is everyone that has breath, wherever they are, all recognize the sovereignty of God. It might include the idea of the dead showing their submission, but that everyone that has breath and has any sense recognizes the sovereignty of God. Yeah, Brenda? Absolutely, yeah. Right, yeah. Part of the point of the book is to show that all creation is is really involved in God's purpose. And so all creation plays a part in the strategy. That's why the lightning and the thunder and the sea are present there, is to communicate that they too are submissive to God who has all authority. Yeah. Yeah, Brother Howard.
Chapter 4, God is never described.
Good point.
Picture's never painted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, God is never described. Jesus, who became a man, is described. God is just the image of His awesomeness, of His majesty, is suggested by the images that are painted there. Okay, great questions, and really appreciate your all's attention this morning.